Have you checked the children? Your little master.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes that is better.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Long days and pleasant nights, fellow travelers, along the path of the beam. I am known on this level of the tower as Jaime Fuego, and if it please you, join me here for a bit of belated palaver on Hail to Stephen King. That's Reezy. I am not going to be blasting out your eardrums or anything, as I do occasionally have the propensity for. But yes, I welcome you, obviously, to the horror show Bienvenidos, and also to the fact that the belation is because I did not receive my physical copy of GWENDY'S final task until it was a couple days after the initial release, and so I did have a little bit of time to ruminate and to listen to the audiobook a little bit, but I definitely wanted to have a physical copy that I could go through the 400 plus pages of and just get a proper vibe, because of the fact that there was definitely a bit of confliction about this one. And just to preface, I definitely had some misgivings about the previous two. So the first book was GWENDY'S Button Box, obviously, and that was something that King had written and then sent off to his cemetery dance buddy Richard Chizmar, and was like, not sure what to do, man, if you can, help me finish or just rework and, just assist me in the finalization process. And so that's what happened, and I didn't mind it or anything. I found things to appreciate, and most notably, some of the stuff down in Jonestown with the aspect of the fact that this button box, which is mentioned in the title, has catastrophic potential as far as just nastiness that it could impart around the world, and yes, a just growing power and almost an influence that it can seep into you. And then GWENDY'S Magic Feather, and that was not done with King's association. And so, as opposed to like going back and rehashing so much of both of those previous two books, which is most definitely done in this one, it brings you up in a very accelerated narrative speed about certain plot points from both of those previous books that are kind of inherent in if you are somebody who didn't read either of them. And I know that's because this book was positioned and with its narrative to be so supremely epic, and it definitely is. I mean, this is a book that it's got big aspirations, huge ones. I mean, beyond the fact that GWENDY, our title character, is going to space, no less. So just the increasing saga of what she needs to do. Yeah, it's definitely here, because in the first book, yeah, it was very much on that singular Castle Rock level where she grew up, and yet the second book she had gone on to Washington and she was forging a career in politics and stuff. And the third one, most definitely, you can easily criticize, all right, because you can be like, yeah, it's going to space, which is what so many long-standing genre sagas will do when they're starting to run out of ideas, whether it's Hellraiser or Leprechaun or whatever. But I'm going to be very candid and say that I tried early on, after listening to the audiobook, to just give some very raw thoughts about this, and yet I knew I had to think about it. I knew I had to just let it simmer and think, because a lot of the initial thoughts were not supremely positive, and that is definitely something where you have to question yourself, where I felt this way about Ghostbusters Afterlife. I felt this way a little bit about the Boba Fett series and stuff, and where it's like when we are just retreading, characters and big things like we have in this, like something as big as the Dark Tower, which it's not a spoiler for me to mention because you see it right there on the cover. This does tie in with Tower stuff. So we get Tet, we get Sombra, we get, Loman, we get that stuff, and it's all been pretty much prefaced in a lot of the, promotional materials, but it's where you tie in and perhaps rely upon it a little bit too much, as opposed to really forging forward and telling a more compelling narrative, that I have slight misgivings. And so this is where I was like, man, I don't want to be like some old grizzled old man and I'm just hating on this book because it's not bringing enough new to the table. But yet, that is kind of, at least initially, how I felt listening to Marina Ireland, who actually takes over for Maggie Siff. She was the narrator for both of the previous audiobooks of Magic Feather and then also Button Box, but they went for a more esteemed name, which shows just how this was really being positioned with the Tower implications and everything as being a very prolific sort of release. And Marina does a great job. You know, she most recently, Brian Bertino's Dark and the Wicked is one that I can call attention to, where I thought she should have seen Oscar consideration. It is such a dark, just, well, hence living up to the title of it, but just amazingly sad and rumination about grief. And so we've seen that, you know, in the more art house horror ranks for quite a while, but she does a damn good job and has herself with the Toni Collettes and the various others that we have seen do this sort of prolificness lately. Back to the narrative in and of itself, we're going to space, as you have seen. It is going because of the fact that suddenly Gwendy's importance has risen exponentially, and the crux and the importance of the box as well. And the fact that, yeah, we knew just with the first book and what happens in Jonestown and the destruction there that was associated, you have buttons on this box that all have a correlation with a continent, and then you also have, think of it, will it sort of red button, and then on the other side you have a black button, which is association of just destruction of everything, not just Earth, but like all realities. And so I guess I can't be as critical about the fact that that button had such importance and that it was laid out like groundwork style, and for them to explore it within this, and how the box, even if it has passed amongst different people, the fact that it keeps coming back to Gwendy with our RF character, our Richard Ferris. And once again, I'm not gonna go super spoilery about certain character motivations are kind of clouded. As I just thought about it more, maybe disparate allegiance can make some sense, and where you think somebody should be doing one thing and it's a little bit different than... I'm really having to dance around the issue, walking on eggshells. As I've said in the last few, you know, the Billy Summers and later, most notably, it's very tough to do a completely non-spoiler review aside from going over the stuff that's, you know, you see it in the synopsis and so on and so forth. But yeah, Gwendy is back in the possession of said box, and she is going up into space with a mission of disposal, and I guess that's really as far as I can go with it. As far as the narrative structure, it is doing its fair share of flashbacks, and it makes sense because of the fact that the present within this book takes place in 2026. That's when the Tech Corporation is actually putting Gwendy and the 9 other people. So there's 2 women, there's her and Kathy, if I remember correctly, and then there's 8 men, and they're all being pushed up in the largest spacecraft to ever, as you see right there, yeah, to ever go up to the MF space station. And yeah, they most definitely have their fair share of just like little joking bits about the Many Flags space station. And you've also got some Kubrick mentions as far as 2001: A Space Odyssey and HAL, and how the computer system that is supposed to be having their back there. Like, well, I'm hopeful we don't have any of those HAL moments or anything. But when I was initially just kind of thinking, and like first reactions, there's a phrase that Gwendy comes back to countless times, which is one from her mother, who, as those who have read Magic Feather, and the fact that she had cancer, and just the utilization of the button box within that, yeah, her mother said NG all the time, not good. And it's probably more so a not great sort of assessment, but yeah, I did really, the fact that that phrase is used over and over, it came back to me over and over, and it's really more so the fact that art is subjective, as I constantly contend. And yes, it's a personal taste sort of thing, but I've definitely experienced the repercussion recently of expressing opinion and just not having them be positive. And hey, when you're out in the sphere, as they like to say it, you have to have that thick skin, so to speak. But yeah, I thought a lot about this story was not good, not necessarily bad, but just back to lack of inspiration and more so relying upon the kind of pandering tie-ins as opposed to, like, because there's there are so many. I mean, we get everything from Darkscore Lake to a lot from Derry, very much so, and especially a shootout with some gangsters that happened in the 30s. And I mean, there's a lot of tie-in stuff. So it's beyond the aspect of Easter eggs. Like King was always fond of the Easter eggs, and certain times, like most notably with like Bag of Bones, there would be tons of them, you know, older characters, old, and, you know, references to stories from before. But this one, I feel like, as opposed to having them be just like a cool little bonus, I feel like it massively relies upon them a little bit more so than is necessary. And the biggest comparison that I can definitely make is to the Castle Rock television series, where I could tell that there was like playing around this very prolific sandbox with all of these ideas and so many connections and so much coolness, obviously, that's been done over the years. And it felt more reliant upon looking back. It's a very heavy criticism with a lot of big established IPs, and I feel it's really fair in this regard. Personal opinion, obviously, because I'm sure there's a lot of peeps who are really digging this book, and that's not to say that I didn't have positive aspects to it. There is very much kind of a boldly going, the Enterprise series had a little bit of that vibe. There is one bit between Gwendy and her mother in a flashback. As I said, there's lots of different flashbacks, but this is where I was being reminded of the fact that, and this felt very much like a King passage, maybe more so than a Chiz passage, you know, and Chizmar, you know, Richard, obviously. And I heard that they were tossing it back and forth, and, you know, and it would be like, you write a little bit, I'll write a little bit. It's very tough a lot of the time to establish which portions were written by who, because, you know, King has done it years ago with Peter Straub. Obviously, he did it with Sleeping Beauties with his son Owen, and obviously he's had his fair share of it recently, and like even Stuart O'Nan with A Face in the Crowd, which I really enjoyed. But there is a passage in this one which is all about the aspect of thinking versus believing, and this is where it just felt very much like King tried and true. It's a flashback that happens in the third act, but it just really felt as seminal and timeless about the fact, okay, you are given a lot of facts, especially when you're in school, and you know, you're taught, okay, think this way, this is the stuff that's been confirmed, and so on and so forth, but yet there will always be things that you believe. And it reminded me a lot of a discussion that takes place in The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, that it takes place with her and her father. So yeah, once again, maybe there is our fair share of retread as far as a similar discussion between the two, but it still rose a chord within me, and it was one of my personal favorite parts of it. And also where we go in the third act, despite the fact that there is, at least for me, it's just all predictable, unfortunately, within this book. Like, I saw, even when they try to cast a little bit of, you know, oh, maybe the intentions of this character, this very much like I'm twiddling my mustache, you know, just very obvious villain. And then you start to wonder, well, maybe, but yeah, that's where I really am dancing around spoilers, and I don't necessarily want to do that. But the book didn't surprise me with anything that it did. And also another thing is that it delved so heavily into politics, and as somebody who's a registered independent, and so I, like, most of my friends are, like, you know, very liberal, very blue, and my parents are red, and I find myself somewhere in the middle. And so for that reason, when we have this just very inherent discussion, and we're basically fashioning in a very one-note sort of just singular dimensionalness about one particular side, and also the virtuousness on the other side. And I think in the second book, Chizmar actually did a better job of making it seem like Gwendy, she was not a perfect sort of person. And if you've read the book, you know, like something in particular. But in regards to this one, like, yeah, I think the term is Mary Sue, and she really, as far as just the pristine perfection that she is portrayed as, it was just a little off-putting, because King specifically, I mean, since I haven't read The Long December or a lot of stuff from Richard, I can't really, you know, really anything from him as far as just going on his own. But I feel like King has constructed characters that were beriddled with flaws. I mean, one of my absolute favorites, Larry Underwood, even though he becomes a villain of the story, you know, in somebody like Jack Torrance, he's not all bad. And so it's like differing shades of gray, and yet everything as is described, yeah, that's where it's just so tough to actually talk about this, because that ties in very distinctively with those who have also held the burden of taking care of the box, and just how heavy of a burden it is, like Pilgrim's Progress, and, you know, sort of Shizzle almost to a degree. And Gwendy seems like as smug and spotless in this as I think in any of the trilogy. And so for that reason, yeah, maybe I did find that a bit off-putting. And I'm still not really spoiling much of anything. This is just impressions about the presentation. And, you know, it's definitely a very trite, small sort of nitpick, but I definitely felt like there was a essence of product placement within this book. And yes, it's a nitpick, but it's like those people who nitpicked about the Transformers film, where there was like the cracking open of the Bud Light and like taking a deep chug of it and everything. There are a number of moments like that within this, because there are times where you reference it as just being a tablet or whatever, but then there's dozens where you mention iPads. There is also, Gwendy has a insurance claim, and as opposed to being like, yeah, I got an email from my insurance person, it directly mentions Progressive. And yes, I know King has mentioned like Burger King and McDonald's and his affinity for that sort of fast food, but just those sort of little injections where I felt like they were unnecessary, I don't know why. But personally for me, that sort of thing just makes me feel just, I don't know, a little bit turned off. I didn't want to relive the nastiness of all of the pandemic related stuff, and yet that's most definitely what this book did for a large contingent of it. Like the stuff in space, I greatly appreciated, and although in the third act it does just kind of meander around a little bit and you're like waiting for something to happen, you know, but there is a mysterious aspect with regards to Gwendy's husband that goes down that does play itself particularly well for a little bit, but the payoff about what goes down, I mean, I don't know. There's just so much predictability, and I feel like I'm getting long-winded in the negativity as opposed to saying I really appreciated where we got at the very end of the story, despite some familiarity with one of my favorite early Stephen King books as far as how everything kind of plays itself out in the very end. And being a fan of, you know, Space the Final Frontier and everything, I did appreciate that to a degree, and I enjoyed just getting to relive aspects of the fact that there is this importance of the other worlds than these. And yet I'm struggling, guys. I'm really trying to be as positive as possible about this. I'm planning to read not only this again, but along with the other two before the 1st of March, which is where we actually will be having a live trilogy discussion about all 3 books, and maybe with all 3 of them in succession, and with taking major notes as opposed to going off of these sort of knee-jerk reactions, I will have gained a further appreciation. But as it stands, I definitely cannot say that I was over the moon, and I guess that analogy does particularly work in this regard. I definitely did not love this one. I found aspects of appreciation, and yet, as a whole, I can't say that I really just wholeheartedly recommend this trilogy. But once again, art is subjective, and it is what it is in that particular regard. There's still a few other pages of notes, but I really feel like everything else I would personally prefer to wait and, you know, just ruminate on a little bit further, as I mentioned, and save them for when we actually have the opportunity to go spoilery, and everybody will have had the chance to have not only obtained their copies, but either listened or read or whatever it may be. So just give it a little bit of time, and absence does make the heart grow fonder in that particular regard. And yeah, I am very hopeful that with taking a look at GWENDY'S saga as a whole in the midst of this particular trilogy, and as I said, they're definitely notes that are bordering a little bit more on the spoilery, and I most certainly do not want to do that. So have you given all of your attention to GWENDY'S final task? Do you think it was an improvement on the previous couple of entries? Was it the epic just culmination, I suppose, that you were wanting? Were you satisfied with the fact that it did realign certain characters? It did kind of thrust the importance of her narrative way beyond all of the tower-related stuff that I would say even came in all of those years of, for this series, which is still relatively new, to really get thrust into grandioseness. That was really where I'm not so sure if I can give it that sort of benefit of the doubt, and I'm damn sure trying. But I am most definitely very curious about where all of your thoughts stand. So I extend the grande gracias. I've been Jaime Fuego. You can find more on all social media sectors like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, here on YouTube. I know over the course of the past week there have been some big reviews of The Cursed, also the new Texas Chainsaw Massacre film, which is on Netflix. So all of that stuff is ready and available to check out, and there's over 300 Stephen King related book review, film review, television series, all that sort of stuff. So I've been at it for a long time, and maybe there is an aspect of just being jaded and getting that grizzledness. I don't know. I mean, just give your thoughts and sound off accordingly, but these are mine, and I am most definitely here to own them. So I've been Fuego, y'all have been Rad Status, and until the Wheel of Ka comes around once more, hasta luego, and amigos, constant readers and viewers alike, say thank you. I am hopeful that we do share more of this palaver sooner rather than later, and that it is of a far more joyous variety from me, and I'm not trying to be Debbie Downer, Negative Nancy, I assure you of that. But until then, remember to stay scared, and honestly, read Stephen King. Make your own assessment. I implore you. I would love to hear your thoughts.